Welcome to episode 149. I'm Stuart, McCullough, the CEO of VHIA. Today with me is Tim Nagle, the Manager of Workplace Relations Services. In today's podcast, we're going to be summarising key changes arising from the recent negotiations to replace the Nurses and Midwives Agreement. It's the first of two such podcasts. Today we'll be discussing key changes in parts A through F of the agreement. And next week we'll be releasing a podcast covering key changes in parts G through to the appendices.
This podcast complements the Provisional Summary of Changes document that was distributed to members in Bulletin 2552.
Our approach will be to highlight key changes. That is, we won't be trying to cover every single change arising from the agreement.
There is, to that point, other information available, such as a report regarding high-risk items that was distributed by Bulletin 2552, as was the Provisional Summary of Changes document. A podcast addressing high-risk items is now available on the website and the VHIA network as well.
There will be more information to come, including podcasts on individual clauses, enterprise agreement forums, and Know Your Agreements training.
We're currently considering how best to deliver these services, but are considering both live streaming and recorded options to optimise participation.
Please note that whilst the parties did exchange specific clauses, we do not have a complete draft agreement to provide to members at this point in time. We do not anticipate a ballot in the immediate future. Tim, that takes us to Part A of the agreement, preliminary. The key changes in Part A really arise from Clause 4, definitions. Definitions contains the terms really that are defined there and apply throughout the agreement.
So many changes have no impact. They include changes to reflect new terminology without a change to cost, such as the definition of base rate. Changes to appropriately reflect midwifery roles, including Director of Midwifery and Associate Midwifery Unit Manager, defining registered midwife and midwife, which recognises existing roles. And finally, changes to reflect the three-level nurse manager structure that was implemented in the last agreement.
However, within Clause 4, there are some key changes to be aware of. These are as follows: campus and enrolled nurse and registered nurse. With respect to campus, this term will be defined as meaning a site operated by an employer that provides day, procedure, surgery or multi-day inpatient or residential aged care, but excludes a site that is a community health centre, a site that is where the only service is aged care beds that do not include high care beds under the Safe Patient Care Act 2019, Dental Health Services Victoria, private residences, and provided that a satellite service co-located on a campus controlled by another employer is not a separate campus for the purposes of this agreement. There's more information in episode 148 around that, and members need to take particular care with regards to the definition of low care and high care. It has a very specific meaning under the Safe Patient Care Act. Part B, consultation, dispute resolution and discipline.
So within Part B there are changes to the following terms. Clause 11, consultation. Clause 12, redundancy and associated entitlements. Clause 13, dispute resolution procedure. Clause 14, statewide classification committee. And finally, Clause 15, discipline. So in terms of the changes to Clause 11, consultation, key outcomes include no change to the definition of major change and significant effect. That means the circumstances requiring consultation are unchanged, so that's despite a number of claims in this area. Secondly, a requirement at subclause 11.4 that, if relevant to the change, that position descriptions will be provided. Statement at 11.4 that any concerns over whether a change impact statement complies will be raised as soon as practicable. And finally, clarification about what was subclause 11.10, but now will be subclause 11A. So clause 11.10, which will now be 11A, requires a truncated form of consultation for changes regarding hours and when work is performed. There was some confusion as to when this term applied and how it interacts with the rest of the clause previously, so this seeks to address that.
So that term had been introduced in 2016 because it was a requirement of the Fair Work Act that it be introduced. And because it was a statutory requirement, we went back to the explanatory memorandum, which provided that the term only applies to changes in hours and when work is performed where it's not the result of major change. This has been clarified to align it with the intention of the legislation.
So that takes us to Clause 12, redundancy and associated entitlements. So this term has been amended at 12.3 to address spill and fill scenarios, specifically by stating that the existing pool of staff will be considered first when the number of positions is being reduced. The second amendment, which is a minor amendment at 12.4, aligns with the state government IR policy. So the two changes are there.
That takes us to Clause 13, which is the dispute resolution procedure. So this term has been amended in two key ways. It clarifies at subclause 8 that the term itself doesn't confer a right for external lawyers and paid agents to appear, and that the normal rules under the Act, specifically under Section 596, apply. Apparently that had been a source of confusion. And at 13.4, it provides greater flexibility to the parties to a dispute as to how they conduct it, including whether they can conduct any part of that process in writing, if they both agree.
So Clause 14 is the next clause, that's the statewide classification committee. This term will be amended to broaden the role of the committee to cover classification disputes, whether they fit with an existing classification or not, and staffing disputes where a ward is amalgamated. So two specific increases. And also access to the Fair Work Commission will be retained.
Clause 15 is the disciplinary clause, and this term has some very important amendments. It includes an amendment at subclause 1E to provide a term for those employees who are yet to complete a minimum period of employment, often referred to as a probationary period. Whilst the term does state that certain procedural fairness requirements need to be adhered to, it also provides that the 3-stage warning process doesn't apply during that period of time. It also provides that there is no need to investigate where the performance or conduct issue is undisputed. However, under those circumstances, whilst you can skip over the investigation phase, the employee is still entitled to be heard on the issue of mitigating factors before a decision about a sanction is reached, a sanction if any.
In addition, the clause will clarify that a first and final warning only occurs in the case of serious and willful misconduct. A term has been introduced to clarify that performance management can occur where an employee is also being disciplined, but performance management cannot be used to introduce an additional sanction, and that's to clarify an issue that arose during the current agreement.
That takes us to Part C, type of employment, commencement of employment and end of employment.
So there are three key changes in Part C as follows.
So Clause 21 concerns fixed term employment. So the term really gives effect to the existing requirement, that is that fixed term employment should only be used for genuine fixed term arrangements, but it provides greater detail and more information with regards to those obligations, and it also includes how these arrangements can be used to support flexible work arrangements, that is not for the flexible work arrangement itself but to make it happen.
Clause 22, the changes to letter of appointment, the term has been amended to reflect what will be an existing practice for many employers.
Namely, where the parties agree to vary the letter of appointment, the variation will be in writing.
Correct. Clause 23, notice period before termination. It's a long-standing requirement to issue a certificate of service at this time. This term has been amended to specify when it's to be provided, namely within 14 days where practicable upon termination of employment.
So moving to Part D, wages. The first thing to say about Part D is that the wage increases under the agreement will be as agreed in 2016. That is 9% over the life of the agreement, of 3 increases of 3% on the 1st of December 2020, 21 and 22. But within Part D there are probably 4 particular changes for members to be especially aware of.
So the first one's at Clause 26, payment of wages, employee records and related matters. And this clause has been amended to include some of the existing requirements of the Fair Work Act around records and pay slips.
It also includes a term with regards to biometric timekeeping, to the effect that where an employee has a genuine difficulty in complying, the employer will consider measures to mitigate or avert the impact.
And where an employee gives notice, the employer should pay outstanding monies by no later than the next pay period following the end of employment. This was an employer claim to clarify when that occurred.
The Fourth Amendment concerns Clause 27 superannuation and clarifies the choice of fund applies both to employer and employee contributions.
That takes us to Part E, allowances and reimbursements. So Clause 32 is the rural and isolated practice allowance, and the clause has been amended to preserve the allowance, and it will also be available to new candidates.
There is another term under allowances with regards to lead aprons. A new allowance of $8 per shift for those who are required to wear a lead apron, that is part of their usual duties. That is, it doesn't apply to someone who needs to wear one occasionally.
Clause 35, high duties, has also been amended. This term has been amended to provide a high duties allowance where an EN is in charge of a ward of a high aged care facility. This is not a common circumstance. The effect of the term is to ensure that there is no cost saving where this is necessary.
That takes us to Part F, hours of work and related matters. There are some key changes that occur within Part F, including to hours of work, Clause 42, meal breaks, Clause 44, rosters, Clause 45, overtime, Clause 49, and recall, both with and without a return to work, Clauses 50 and 51.
Takes us to Clause 42, hours of work. The key changes here concern the addition of 4 employers and subclauses 42.7 to adopt an 8-8-10 roster. That is, the claim to have a uniform 8-8-10 roster and start and finish times was not agreed and will not be part of the next agreement.
There are a couple of points that have been clarified in the new agreement regarding 12-hour shift arrangements. Firstly, it provides for additional breaks for those with a 12-hour shift agreement, but it also specifies how a 12-hour shift agreement can come to an end.
Clause 44, breaks. The meal break provision has been amended to require that employers have an escalation process, identifying the person responsible for ensuring that employees get a meal break and considering the factors that contributed to the employees not being able to take a meal break.
There's also another new term with regards to breaks concerning those who have to change clothes for their work, such as theatre staff. In effect, what it requires is that this is managed locally to ensure that those changes occur during work time.
That takes us to Clause 45, rosters. There are several key changes to the rosters clause. These are directed to making work more certain. The first one is rosters to be posted 28 days in advance. Predictable on-call to be on a roster 28 days in advance also, although it can be different to ordinary hours. Not less than 14 days rather than 7 days to be given of a change in roster. If 7 or fewer days, 5% of base rate allowance applies. If 14 or fewer but more than 7 days, then this current 2.5% allowance is payable. And finally, with respect to fixed rosters, these can still be unfixed with consultation.
And from memory, that is proposed to take effect from the 1st of July 2020. Clause 49, overtime. Most of the changes here are with respect to providing clarification. So the clause has been amended to specify the casual rate for overtime, clarify that midnight doesn't impact each period of overtime standing alone, specify a rest break for overtime, and clarify what constitutes the approval of overtime.
Clauses 50 and 51 recall both with and without return to the workplace. At Clause 50, there is a new term that will apply from the 1st of July 2021. The term is specific to recall by theatre staff and also cath lab staff, and the effect of the term is to state that from the 1st of July 2021, an employee who is on call should not do overtime other than for an emergency. It does exempt the conclusion of the procedure that's commenced during ordinary time.
So the purpose of those changes is really to prevent those who are on call for theatre and cath lab from doing what's described as routine overtime. What it does, it reduces the risk of someone having to do overtime both at the end of the shift and during the on-call period?
If it can't be avoided, then the routine overtime would be treated as a recall. So it can still occur, but there's a penalty associated with it.
Well, that takes us through to the end of Part F. Next week, we'll be summarising Parts G through to the appendices, which includes leave entitlements. That will be episode 150. Tim, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Stuart.
VHIA.